This is Jesus, James, and Mark, and I am Mark.
And I'm James.
And we welcome you to episode 26 of our fine podcast here.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. There are many ways you can listen to us, so however you're listening, thank you. But we want to give all those options out because perhaps you're listening in a way that's not. You might find out there's an avenue that's better for you.
Yeah.
So find us on Spotify, find us on Amazon Music, find us on Apple Podcasts, find us on iHeart Podcast, as well as YouTube. Finally got our first YouTube video up, and find us on Facebook as well. So we are on all those places. Find us and rate, subscribe, follow,
comment, email.
Please interact. It's really important. Certainly, share the experience as well. We would love for you to do that. So please do. So my friend Chop, the James portion of the show, has just come back from a cruise.
I did.
Wow. That had to be.
It's one of the best ways I've ever vacationed. And it wasn't my first, definitely won't be my last.
I haven't cruised yet.
I would recommend it to anyone.
I haven't, when we've talked about it, you and I, that, so I need to do it. At least try it.
Yeah.
So that, as it's been told to me, I love to eat. I'm an eater.
You're not going to go hungry on that.
Yeah, that's what somebody told me. That said that you may be miserable, but you won't be hungry.
You may be miserable because you're not hungry. You may have overdone it.
So I'm glad to have you back. The last time we did this, we took a break from our Gospel of Mark study.
Yep.
To hit on a couple of things that were sort of in Mark. Well, one of them we had just talked about, the money thing.
Yeah.
But we wanted to talk about translations and things like that, which
it was just a couple of subjects that we've talked about personally over the years, and it seems to be a sticking point for some people, when it comes to religion and money and the validity of the scriptures. All those things they're good subjects to broach and have conversations about.
So now we're gonna dive back into it in the Gospel of Mark, and there's a couple things that are going to happen here, and it's going to happen real quick, which is it's fitting because we've been doing the book of Mark, which is the action gospel. Things move really quickly, and there's not a whole lot of not a whole lot of filler detail. Sometimes you got to search around and look for things. Now, there's a couple of things here. So I know that it's. And I'm in a personal turmoil with this right now because it's the month of April. Whenever you're listening to this, April 2025. So I don't know. You could be listening in some future universe somewhere, but then that means that the time of year in which we celebrate or honor remember Jesus' sacrifice. And the crucifixion
and the resurrection,
right? Which is typically called something that I don't want to call it that anymore, and so I'm dancing around a word that starts with the letter E and ends with the letter R. It has the word East in it, but in studying all of this,
you're personally struggling.
I'm personally struggling with calling it that anymore because it is certainly something that's I hold dear to me. And so it is, I would say by far when we talk about calendar holidays or dates of remembrance, this is to me the biggest of the calendar.
When you mention a religious event,
yes,
this is the one I would say that that grounds this belief. The belief in Christianity is based on this event right here.
Yes. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Christmas. I'll still call it Christmas. But because you can't have one without the other, right? Jesus couldn't have gone to the cross without being born.
Right.
However, and this is not blasphemy, this is just me saying, a lot of people were born and were even born into this is the king.
Yeah.
So I'm not downplaying the birth of our Savior. What I am saying
Another
is that
huge
many
event.
people have been born and had a big announcement that this is the king. No one has been put to death and rose again 3 days later and walked around with other human beings.
Yeah.
And there's so much there too. So so that's why this particular time of year, Pascha, as I'm going to call it that.
That's our new.
I'm going to get. But this isn't that we can't do that because I feel like that's more a Mark 14. Because we're going to get more into the details of that. Because Mark 13, which is where we're picking up, the last time we did anything was Mark 12.
Yep.
Jesus is still the events. I mean, again, we're right on the cusp of Jesus being arrested and tried and tried, and all of that happening. But this is a very important chapter because. And I find it interesting where it's positioned because everything's about to happen in the next chapter that's going to lead to the crucifixion. And these seems like the answers to two of the biggest questions that could be answered. And so we're going to go into 13 first.
Yep.
And the name of this podcast is This Is the End of the World. And you remember that REM song? It's the end of the world as we know it.
You think he was referencing 13?
I don't think.
No,
I'm not sure REM. But now I went and read the lyrics. And there's some very funny things in those lyrics. Now, one of them is, as Christians, we should say, I do like the part, it's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine.
Yeah,
and that's I don't.
We should be rejoiceful when that finally happens. Yeah,
I think most people will still have some anxieties for sure. Yeah. But that is. But there's an interesting serve yourself is in there is in the lyrics several times. It does talk about how the world is very selfish and all that. But actually what I want to focus on because there is an end of. There's some very apocalyptic language in this chapter. And this particular language is, to me, look, let's be honest. Everybody would love to be able to tell you, I know when the end of the world is going to happen. Right? And this has been part of, and nothing, well, I would say there are many things that lead people to Christianity, lead people to religion, and one of them is that imminent. I don't know this. Is this the end of the world? There are things that happen that make us think things aren't right. This feels like the world's on the and look. Let's be honest. A lot of people think now and the times we live in have that sort of volatility. You know, that's sort of just it's a combustible situation. Like at any moment. Yeah. You know, the world could just collapse.
I don't remember, though, a time in my life, and I have been in and out of churches, and my walk has been very far away and very close at times, but I've always remembered a time when there was somebody preaching that this was the sign. This is happening right now. And we do get fixated on those kind of things.
We do.
For some reason...
They did then, by the way.
And we are inquisitive beings, right? We want to know things, and I totally get it. I think we should focus more on knowing what the signs are, as less on seeing if we can nail down the day, because it obviously says in the book, you're not going to know. No man, not even Christ, knew the day. So why?
Yeah,
I think it can be a distraction in some sense, to where we're not focused on the proper things. If we're just focused on trying to take all the signs and figure out what that points to.
I don't want to skip ahead, and because we quit reading, and I want to give a shout out to Tony. You know Tony.
I know Tony.
Who was listening, and by the way, was listening to our podcast. She's driving, and when she discovered our new policy of we're not reading the book anymore, and she hadn't read. By the way,
she immediately turned us off.
No. She said, "I can't stop and read now, guys. I'm just gonna have to go with it." Again, I'm assuming people have read this. I know I'm gonna read some
portions, yeah.
But I do know that when you're reading this, I feel like, again, exactly what you're talking about, that it's easy for us to sit here, and I think when he's talking about, there's and again, I'm not trying to skip ahead, but when he's talking about when the master's away,
yeah.
And what do you do? Now, and I'm just throwing this out. I'm not saying everybody's like this, but I feel like let's say we knew when the end was coming. Do you not think some people would say, well, then knowing how the fundamentals of Christianity work, I'm just going to act a certain, one, it's not going to work for you because you're talking about being able to change your heart at the last minute. Good luck with that. But don't you think a lot of people would say, well, then I'm just going to act a fool up until August 13th?
Think about your childhood. What did you do when you knew your parents weren't going to come home? Right. When you knew, you
could misbehave.
You could misbehave up until
had some idea that they were coming home.
Yeah.
Because
and I'll give you the prime example. My dad was a stickler about cutting the grass, and we had a push mower that was about a 12-inch wide cut.
Oh.
It was not fun. But when he came home, that grass better have been cut, or you better be still pulling on that handle trying to get that thing started. you did not. And we would mess around. There was three, me and my two brothers. We were in charge of it. We would take turns doing it. But we would actually split the yard up and say, that's your section, that's your section. You could do it whenever you wanted to.
Right.
But if my section was done, I didn't worry. That's on you. But I'm telling you, we would push it to the last minute because we knew what time Dad got home from work.
It would be in our human nature.
That is human nature, right? Yes. To do things like that.
And so, I'm not saying this is the principle in which God based but I feel like that's got to be part of it. Knowing humanity, knowing that we would, if we knew the date, we would work around it. And understandably,
it's human nature. It's human nature to do that. You just keep thinking, I got time.
I've got time. Which is, look, I think a lot of people do that too, just foolishly. In our youth, we did that waiting to be Christian.
Way too much, yeah.
So if you're a young person, I'm going to wait till I'm old to be Christian. I mean, think about how crazy. Saying that out loud now seems crazy. And we didn't say that then, but we were living it. We were thinking, well, that sounds really good. I'll put that in my back pocket.
Yeah.
And I'll come back to it later. Maybe when I need it. Okay, but I don't want to get too lost in this without. There's a saying, and I'm terrible about sayings. Like I will screw up a saying, but I made sure that I got this right.
You wrote this one down.
I did. And maybe you've heard this. A text without context is pretext. Have you heard this?
I've not heard that.
Okay. So, but you know what pretext is?
Sort of.
I have the Merriam-Webster's.
I understand what you're saying.
No. Yeah. No, but let's, because a lot of people are going to nod their heads, and I get it, and I'm not trying to be that guy, but I'm like, let me, because I got a point I'm going to hammer through here. Okay, so a pretext. So we know what a text is. What we're getting ready to read, Mark 13, is the text.
The text, yeah.
Okay, so if I read the text without context. Now, context is, okay, I understand what is happening. That means I understand who's speaking, who they're speaking to, what they're speaking about, and etc. So a text without understanding is pretext. A pretext is a reason given in justification of a course of action that is not the real reason. And my problem with this is because I have, without a doubt, and I'm not here to throw anybody up under a bus or to call out anybody at all, but I have been in a church setting in which the language of, to me, Mark 13 and many other scriptures have been thrown at me as end of the world language. And I'm about to really kind of blow some people up with some stuff that I think we just, again, let's go back to the original thing of this podcast. I am not a pastor, didn't go to seminary. Yeah. This is a man, I am a sports radio guy who is doing this on my own time, my own research. And again, it's a little deeper than a Google search, but as I'm saying, but at the same time, I'm gathering this information, and this is knowledge. This is me checking and then checking another source and checking another source before I'm going to open this podcast microphone and about to spill to you that what I have been told was tribulation at the end of the world was actually a prophecy about the end of the Jewish church that was about to happen. At the beginning of Mark 13, it starts with the destruction of the temple. Jesus basically prophesied that because they're walking around the temple and they're like, man, look at this temple.
Yeah, and Jesus goes, they go like, hey, Jesus, look at this. What do you think it is?
And he's like, I tell you,
not one
stone's going to be left here. And as I said, a lot of people have taken part of this Mark 13 narrative and verses and applied that to the end of the world. Now, there are, to me, in the studying that I've done, I think there is part of this that refers to the end of the world, which refers to us. But there's an anchor verse in Mark 13 that we have to go to, and I'm going to have to look up and see what the verse is. But I think as you're reading this, there's a specific marker that separates. So Jesus is walking. They're like, look at these things, and he says, look at this amazing temple. Then he tells them, hey, this temple is coming down. Like there's not gonna be nothing left of this thing.
And when was that? AD 70?
Yes,
that the temple was destroyed.
And he's saying this at AD 33. Yeah. So he's 30 some years away from this. Is yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that particular thing up. So then as he says that, it goes later, and so then the disciples or whatever, they're all asking him, and there's a 2-part question. And in this 2-part question, Jesus gets asked about the end of the times and the end of the age. And so I want to find this one particular verse because I feel like this is the anchor.
Is that verse 4?
No.
That's the question.
Yeah, the question is more. Yeah, so read that real quick.
All right, so verse 4 says, "Tell us when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things will be fulfilled?"
Okay. So the signs of the time and the ends of the age, basically. So he's sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, and as you were talking about. And then so he starts to answer as a 2-part question. Now, I feel like people have taken that as one question.
Yeah. They seem very similar.
Right. Like he's saying you're basically answering the same, but he's not. These are actually 2 different questions. And the anchor verse is you have to skip. So I'm asking you to skip ahead. And again, I know some of this means that you're going to have to maybe do, because if you're driving, Tony, it means you're going to have to look at it later.
Put your phone down.
Right. But it is 13:30. Mark 13:30, when he says, "Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away." These are Jesus' words. Everything he says before that is going to happen in the next 30 some years. And so my thing is, we've taken this text and some of that language and thrown that into the end of the world. So what he said, when you skip to 30, that to me, that verse says everything I said before that, all of those things are going to happen before this generation passes away. So when I say context, remember he is speaking to these Jewish people and he's speaking to that generation. So he's saying, look, I'm telling you all of these horrific things that are going to happen, all of these tribulations that are going to happen before you pass away.
Yeah, so let me give the other side of that real quick, because I was on the side of this being end times discussion. And the verse that had locked me into that way of thinking was verse you know what verse it is.
I do.
Verse 14. In verse 14, when he speaks, he says the abomination of desolation spoken about in Daniel.
Yes,
and then in parentheses it says, let the reader understand, which to me would be, when I read this initially, and you've done a great job convincing me that that's not how this should be understood, because I would have taken that originally as saying that he's not speaking to those people he's talking to. This is something that will be written down and it will be read in the future.
Yes.
And this is a good example also of the fact that we had biblical scriptures AD 70 because people would have been reading that Jesus said this in AD 70 when the temple was destroyed.
Yes.
That ties in perfectly good with the understanding that you've given me about the verse you just read.
What people, and here's something that, and I haven't shared this with you yet, and I hope this is a big light bulb moment for you too, as it was for me, because I never thought about this. That the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, because as you were saying, these books would be later, as I said, would be written later. They were passed down. It was an oral thing until it was written.
Until somebody wrote it down, yeah.
But the destruction of the temple, and there's an even reference to this later of, because a lot of times this is the thing we do too when we read the Bible. We can read it figuratively somewhat, and then want to flip it to, oh, he's saying exactly that thing. Like he means, when he's saying God's coming, he means God's coming. Sometimes when they're saying the Son of Man is coming, that means that the Spirit of God is coming down upon, and so it references that in 70 AD. That was another affirmation. The temple's destruction was another affirmation of Jesus being the Messiah. And that's right. That's what we don't see now, because again, go back to where we did this thing earlier. I come to fulfill these scriptures and to bring about the kingdom of God first for the Jew, and then the Gentile. So we have to remember when we're reading this, we read it as Christians and Christians.
And we have the full story. We have every bit of information is right here for us.
But Jesus, even until his last breath on the cross, was trying to reach the Jewish nation. And so that's the context we have to remember. Despite we want to project this, and I've got no visions into prophecy, but what I do know is, in studying this now and understanding how it was written, Jesus was trying to alert the people of this time that a great tribulation was about to take place imminently in the next few years. I was telling you, there's a historian named Josephus,
who was not a Christian. He was a Jew,
but he's one of the people who's verified Jesus's.
Yep.
In fact, I've got a ton of notes here about Josephus, and
I would honestly think if you were going to find any negative writings against the resurrection, it would have come from Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish historian that would have wanted no dark marks against Judaism, right? So if there was any evidence that there was no resurrection, Josephus would have wrote about it.
He absolutely would. So Josephus, first off, writes about the Romans destroying the temple in 70 A.D. And I know this is, again, he was considered a first century Palestinian historian based on but wrote about the false Christ. So when you read Mark 13, there's another thing that the language that easily, because we'll talk about Antichrist and things like that. There will people who will come and say that they were me. And so but Josephus wrote about. So in Josephus' writings from the first century, after Jesus died, there were many who claimed to also be the Christ. So he wrote about those things.
Well, you would have to think after that event and the notoriety that it got and the following that it had, there had to be a lot of people trying to do the copycat thing, right? That were trying to jump on that bandwagon. And you've seen that over history. But I would have to assume that right after, there would have been just a surge of that kind of the deceitfulness, people just trying to jump on a bandwagon.
So while you've been on a cruise, I've been trying to cram the Jerusalem Wars, the Josephus' great writings, the Jerusalem Wars.
You've been doing a lot of reading.
And the Antiquity of the Jews, which is 2 books that Josephus wrote. And so there's this terminology also in there called the abomination of the desolate. Mm-hmm. And if you want to have a fun little trip down the rabbit hole, you can go down that. There's obviously people that think of it as a being or a beast or a vision of the Antichrist.
In everything I've ever studied, it's always been referenced as the Antichrist. It's never. I mean, I don't think Antichrist is actually a word. It may be in Revelations, Antichrist, the actual word, but it's not in the Gospels. But that abomination of desolation has always been referred to as the Antichrist, and from anybody I've ever listened to preach on it.
And so there is, Josephus wrote about 2 abominations. There's the abomination of desolation and the abomination that makes desolate. And you and I had a discussion before we started this. And so there's 2 people you need to know about. About 200 years before Jesus, or before the crucifixion or so, about 164 BC, the first abomination of the temple, abomination of the desolate, was Antiochus. Let me see if I can get this name right. Antiochus Epiphanes.
Yeah, okay.
That's as close as I can get to it. And so he defiled the temple. I mean, and we've got to remember this too, because you and I just spent some time talking about how God doesn't live in a temple.
Yeah.
But ignore that and put yourself into being a first century Jew.
Right. The temple was the house of God. It is where God's presence was at.
And so to do anything like that in the house of God was absolutely.
He killed a pig on the altar, and the swine was an unclean animal. Which it would have, I don't even know how the Jews would have handled that.
And so there were no sacrifices until they got him, basically thrown out. So there's the first one. The second one is, and this is where you and I were having our discussion, because so Mark 13, if you really, and when we started this discussion, I really encourage you. So as you're reading Mark 13, if you're really I love this. Well, then go read Luke 21 and Matthew 24, because they're the same. It's the same thing except 2 different perspectives.
Right. It's speaking on the same conversation that was going on right here.
And the Luke conversation is good for people like you and I who aren't Jewish.
Right.
Because I was telling you, Luke does not call it the abomination of the desolate. In fact, the phraseology, we don't have to look it up. You and I were talking earlier. I wrote it down. Luke says, when you see armies in the temple, which go up to 70 AD, and so I don't want to. I feel like part of this is a boring history lesson by Uncle Mark, but So the Zealots around 60 AD threw the Romans out of Jerusalem. So everything that they wanted out of Jesus to happen, they got. Now, here's what happened after that. Then there's three powerful Jewish factions who then start to fight each other for control of Jerusalem.
Because they each thought their way was the right way.
They're not letting people leave the city. These are the times Jesus starts to talk about. This is when tribulations are going to start happen. So there's
a
this
note I had on the word tribulation. The word that's translated in this text actually is better translated birth pangs. So it references these tribulations as something that starts off mild and then grows in intensity until it comes to the ultimate delivery, I guess, of the event. And so that would definitely involve time, right? To where it would start off kind of light and get heavier and heavier and heavier until it exploded into something like the 70 AD temple destruction.
And so so around 60 AD, Zealots throw out the Romans. Okay, well the Romans aren't going to just simply stand for this. So there's this general Vespasian, and he starts to.
You're nailing the names today, bud.
I know. I think I did my deal. So General Vespasian is now going to try to. It's like we're going to take back the city, and at the same time, these factions are fighting within the city walls. They're mistreating the Jewish people, but there gets to be a blessing. So as Vespasian creeps in, and we're about to have imminent doom happen.
And what time of the year are we at?
Well, hold on. No. Let me get to this. There's still a chance. So Nero's the emperor, the Roman emperor. He dies. Well, Vespasian decides, well, hold on, I don't know what to do here. So he holds on, which gives a little bit more time for these factions to sort of still fight and still gain all this power. Well, Vespasian ends up being a part of this power struggle. He actually becomes the next emperor. He hasn't forgotten being driven out of Jerusalem. And so all this little time of reign comes to the 70 AD. So you get these 10 years. And about that time, Vespasian has sent his son Titus. And Titus has surrounded the city. And so Josephus even writes that the Jewish factions that were fighting wouldn't let the Jewish people leave. Obviously wouldn't let the Christian people leave. And there's this talk about when we talk about when you see these things, don't go back for your cloak,
right?
Or, go because again, you were going to have a very small amount of time to escape
once the gates were locked.
And then it says, like on the Sabbath day. Well, again, you couldn't do anything on this. You weren't allowed to walk a certain amount of steps.
Yeah. On
the Sabbath day, so you certainly couldn't leave, even if you were non-Jewish, because Christians would be persecuted if they.
Yeah.
So this was a big you have to understand that the bloodshed this nearly annihilated the Jewish people, this particular war, because again,
you say 1 million or so.
1 million or so, yeah. So again, and it comes to this point where the Jewish factions take the temple, turn it into a military stronghold. This becomes a total abomination. Go back to what we're talking about with the temple. Yeah. This is a house of God. Now you've turned it into a military stronghold. And don't think you work on a base.
Yeah.
And, again, it's not an active war situation. So it's people go up in the base, you go through the security check. And I think and so when you think the temple, maybe you're thinking, oh, there's just military people in the temple. No, there were fighting, there was bloodshed, there was wars. If you want to go do the deep reading, they said that there was so much death in Jerusalem at this time, there was no place to put the bodies, no place, and there was no time to bury them. So they would just throw them over the wall or leave them where they were. There were just dead bodies everywhere.
Wow.
So when Jesus was talking about this tribulation, this is the times he's talking about where there's just dead bodies everywhere. There's there's ungodliness, there's lawlessness everywhere, and people give in to the lawlessness because again, what are you supposed to do at that point? And
survive.
Again, I could go into more of the history. Go read it yourself. Again, it's Josephus. There's even another guy. I read some of his stuff too. His name is Eusebius. He was also a historian, maybe about a century after Josephus, who also verified. So as the stories corroborated, he verified a lot of Josephus' writings as well. But you can go read that. Then, as I said, fast forward to 70 AD, Titus destroys the temple entirely. And you have to go back and think, this is, again, the end of a way of life.
Yep.
And so keeping that into context is to understand why, well, then why am I reading about this? I'm not a first century Jew. But it was important to him. And again, it was fulfilling of prophecy
and I also,
from the Old Testament.
A thought that just popped in my head was the fact that when Christ was crucified and the veil ripped, like signifying that there was no more division between you and God, right? That each individual could talk to their God individually. But the Jews kept on with the tradition, right? They kept the temple, they kept the sacrifice, they kept everything going. So the temple had to be destroyed. I mean, it was almost an inevitability. It had to come to that, so that all of the traditional things could come to an end. Almost, it seems like the next step after the crucifixion.
And he ends all of this. Jesus, by the way, go back to Mark 13 with another parable about a fig tree. And remember, we were doing our botanical studies.
Yeah.
Well, now we know that those early leaves are from the spring, which, by the way, you'll know when it's Passover because that's when the temple was fully destroyed in 70 AD. And then, as I said, then Mark 13 takes a big turn. And you can even go back and check when Jesus is answering these questions in 13. He goes, but in those days, but in those days, but in those days. And then when that transition happens and he answers the second question, which is the question you're all here for, when's the end of the world happen? He says, but on that day. Now he's talking about a singular day. Now he's talking about, okay, whoa, you're talking about the end of the world, the end of the world, end of the world. Well, I can't tell you anything about that. I can tell you that, and again, go read Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and read about how Chop and I will be sitting here in this room doing this podcast. One of us will go, one of us will stay. Chop will be the one to stay. But in all seriousness, but yeah, I mean, this is when he's talking about, as we call it, the rapture, but this is the end of time. This is the end of the world. This is the revelation. This is the language that we're trying, that, like I said, that I think that many people have tried to insert into the end of the world, which I think this is where he begins to introduce that.
Yeah, and the fig tree and the parable about watching the gate and all that kind of stuff is just more indication of things we need to be looking for to be ready, or we should be prepared all the time. But those signs will give us an idea of how close we're getting. Not that we're never going to pinpoint anything when it comes to that. And that parable about being at the gate near the end of this verse, where he says that when the master's away, he leaves his servants to tend to things. And that's what we are. We're God's servants. We're here to tend to it, and we should be watching continuously for his return, so that when he returns, we can open the door and let him in. Especially
because we won't know, especially when we don't know when his return is going to be.
And most homes, or maybe some of the higher end homes, would have had a house, a little courtyard, and then a wall with a gate, so that when you came through the gate, you were in like a little front yard or whatever before you actually entered the house. And during the night or during the day, when the master was away, somebody was posted at the gate all the time, because the gate had to be open when he got there.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to your story with you and your brothers. So if your dad left
Yeah.
And you didn't know when he was coming back, well, then there wasn't a whole lot of playing. Then it was like, listen.
Oh, we did have somebody peeping out the window. We've done
you
that
had
too.
Somebody at the gate.
We had somebody at the gate.
I mean, you got to have somebody at the gate. Well, you're your own
your
person.
guy, yeah.
So you have to be the only. You have to be at the gate. I know. Look, I'm going to read this, but you're right. I think that really indicates as I've told people here recently too, is I think it's easy for us to get lost in talking about these things, and I think these are good discussions to have. I don't.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The more I've talked, I think it's. Listen, there's lots of conversations to be had, so and many of them are a waste of breath. But this one is not.
I love discussing remember, all of those sort of things.
But do remember, there isn't an answer to be found. When
you're not going to know the day.
There's a Matthew doesn't say it. Mark does in the New King James, but in the other versions he does. I'm going to go back and read this. So right at the end, we'll start with Mark 13:32. But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. I'm going to pause right there really quick because the Son is him.
Yeah.
So look, what is Jesus don't know what's going on? We're talking about the sovereign Lord of the universe doesn't know what's happening, and that's another debate for another day.
Well, Jesus. Then you get into the whole Trinity, the roles of each part of the Trinity, yeah. The fact that Jesus could remove his godly power from himself as a human and still be God. I mean, and again, it's stuff that maybe is just a little too far outside of our realm of understanding.
Yeah, it's like you and I talked. I think we were talking about this. Was it yesterday when we were talking about, and it said, look, I think to make it as simple for us to understand is if you're going in to be a human, maybe there's some things you're like, I need to take that information out of me because I may fail and then share that information unnecessarily.
And I think there's an opportunity for that to happen in 14, but we'll get to that when we get to it.
All right, but I want to finish this by reading this. So it says, "Take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is. It is like a man going to a far country who left his house and gave authority to his servants and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Watch, therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to all, watch." I think
that is what we should be doing.
And so that one thing where he's saying, "Least coming suddenly he find you sleeping," I think that's a warning to say, don't be like, don't be misbehaving.
Yeah.
I would not want to be caught in the wrong place at the wrong time doing the wrong thing at that time.
The one we had at the door did not need to get involved in what we were doing. He needed to keep his eye on the door.
Yep. He probably should have let y'all hang. But, and again, I think we opened up a whole lot of stuff, and now I feel like people, and this is where, we were talking about it, you can get so lost and distracted in this. There's a bigger thing that's getting ready to happen, but I felt like it's fitting that Jesus answered these things before this, despite that and again, I don't know how much I without a doubt, I think Jesus said, I would bet you much like us, 90% of what Jesus said probably went like over their heads. And
again, I still don't think they're 100% on board with what he's trying to. They are still looking for the ruling Messiah to pop up. Like, we're getting ready to get rid of this oppression. They're still waiting for that.
Yeah, I think again, look, it's we started this conversation. I think people want to skip to the end, so to speak, right? Are you one of those people that buys a book and reads like the last few pages? I mean, I look. I think. Look, we all know whether the end of the world happens in your lifetime or not. Here's what I know: no human, aside from Jesus, that I'm aware of, has come to this earth and didn't leave this earth. Okay. Now there's a couple of guys that left other than Jesus that there's some like, wow, he like must have just been taken up. We go Old Testament.
Yeah.
We may talk about those folks one day,
and there were people raised from the dead, but it was done by Jesus, and
they did eventually die.
Yeah.
Right.
They did not defeat death like Christ did.
Right. I think a lot of times people are like, well, Lazarus came back from the dead, but he did die.
Yeah.
He did die. Lazarus is not still alive.
He's not sitting on the throne.
He is definitely not sitting on the throne. But I think it's easy to finish what I was saying, to get distracted into this and not see what's getting ready to happen is a bigger thing. And so to get to that point, to get to the end, some things have to happen. One is, I want it to be the end of the world, but not the end of me, because the soul is eternal.
Right, and that's a good point, is that we are eternal beings. And if you believe that, then you're going to spend eternity somewhere.
Right.
Yes. So it's either with God or without God. I don't think that without God's going to be good for you.
Sounds bad.
Yeah, sounds bad to me.
Sounds really bad. So I think end of the world discussions are fun, but please remember, and especially reading this, I think the Bible is, and I think back to it, I think we are the most, I'm not going to say the most enlightened, but I would say we have the most resources available to us, Christian generation. So we may be the most intellectually empowered Christian generation. So with that responsibility, now we can outgrow the fact that I think a lot of our ancestors just had to go and hear someone's interpretation and kind of accept it, and then understand that some people were just getting bad theology. Some people were getting a bad translation. Some people were getting an inaccurate description. And so, look, I'll go back to what I said. I'm not claiming that I'm accurate. I'm just telling you what I've discovered is I think we've got to take heed. I mean, there's information that would lead you to believe this is not all end of the world discussion here. So I think that it's responsible for us to go out and find. And in fact, I would say it's more it should be more if you thought, oh man, I hate to think about bad things are going to start happening and then the end of the world's going to happen. Does that scare you more? Or we could just be living our lives right now just inadvertently, and then all of a sudden it could happen, which, as I said, there are two philosophies, which we're not going to get into Revelation. This is why this is our little brief soiree into it.
And I would argue that bad things are happening.
Thank you.
We are in the tribulation.
Thank you. Yes, I think there's certainly can be said that some of these things in Revelation may have already come to pass, but I do think there's certainly there's two arguments here. We'll get to them at some point. There's some people think that you're going to get a heavy dose of tribulation before there's a rapture. Some people think there's going to be a rapture and then the tribulation. All I can tell you is I feel like the way it's written, it's going to come like that.
Yeah, whenever
it's going to come like that, and so I think that we've got to definitely.
And what we as Christians can rest in is that we are guaranteed not to suffer God's wrath. So whatever happens up until that point, we will not be part of any wrath of God, which is coming.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can rest assured in that. You're promised that as a Christian.
I do want to, before we wrap this up, because I know we're at the end of this too, because we didn't get to talk about it, but there is something to be said, because so I'm not trying to contradict myself, but what I am trying to say is we do think that there's going to be an Antichrist. one of the great things that's being revealed here in part of this Mark 13 when he's talking about before the end of times, when he's talking about the false Christs. But I think this would also refer to the Antichrist when you read about the Antichrist, how he just sort of comes out of the people. That is not how Jesus appears. Jesus does not sort of sneak out of nowhere. He was here all along, and then he kind of that is deceiving. And so just understand that the way it's written, you're going to know. You're going to know it's Jesus. Not going to be like, oh, well, maybe he is Jesus. No. You're going to know it's Jesus.
And everyone will see.
Everyone will see. So definitely do remember that. So, all right. If you have any questions
or
comments, rebuttals, hate mail, whatever you got, throw it at us. Find us on however you can find us, JesusJamesMark@gmail.com. Comment on Facebook, comment on YouTube. However you got to do it. Rate, subscribe. Yeah. We'll find your input somewhere. Messages.
We need your input.
We do. We'd love to get it. And so for everybody listening, let's do a quick prayer before we get out of here. Thank you, Jesus, for another few moments to talk about the Word and to share it. And so we thank you for that opportunity. We thank you for your mercy and your grace, and we thank you for all things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Episode 27, I think, is coming up. 27?
27.
And now and it's a big one.
It's a big one.
I mean, you know how many times we've said, I don't know how we're going to fit it all in one pod. This is really, I don't know how we're going to fit it all in one podcast.
We'll see.
We're going to see. We're going to see. All right, folks, have a great one. We'll see you next time on Jesus, James, and Mark.